If you would have told me before the season that one of the most talked about things during Packers-Vikings week was going to be Snoop Dogg's nephew's groin, I have so many questions for you. Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews. I am your host, John Del Rey. Yes, today we are previewing Packers versus Vikings, the New Year's Day matchup coming up in Lambeau Field. Certainly huge implications for the Packers in this game. The Vikings, not so much, although they still are in play for the 1 seed and different seeding. But this game is much more important for the Packers in a lot of different ways. Now, let's just cover this right away. Right? What are the playoff things that the Packers need to have happen this weekend? Well, really, number one, of course, they have to win the game, right? We've known for weeks that the Packers have to win out in order to have a realistic shot at the playoffs. Everything imaginable to this point has broken the Packers' way. So now they just got to finish up their job and win these final 2 games, of course, Minnesota being one of them. But the other thing that we can really, really hope for is that the Washington Commanders, quarterbacked once again by Carson Wentz, somehow lose to the Cleveland Browns. Now, it's totally possible. The Browns have not played their best football since Deshaun Watson has come back. You also know that the Browns are going to be actively trying in this game, despite being eliminated from playoff contention already, because that team desperately, for locker room purposes, for media purposes, they need to get on the same page with Deshaun Watson. And so they're going to be trying as hard as they can throughout the rest of the season. We just have to hope that they can take down the Commanders right away this weekend. Here's a cool thing. The Commanders and Browns play at 12 o'clock on Sunday. Packers-Vikings, of course, occurring at 3:25 Central. So we will know just how in control the Packers are of their fate by the time they hit Lambeau Field on Sunday for the game to start. So, before I dive totally into the game preview, here's just the injuries of the day. Today, of course, being Friday, meaning the players got their actual questionable, doubtful, out tags from their teams. And it's really good news across the board for the Packers. Almost perfect news, but really good news. David Bakhtiari, he's coming back. That's right. He's back from that emergency appendectomy. He received no injury designation. Same thing with Aaron Rodgers and his knee. Same thing with Aaron Jones and the maladies he's got going on with all the soft tissue stuff. And Josh Nijman also back. No injury designation for him. However, there are still 2 players that received questionable tags. And you could argue that these are the 2 biggest spark plugs on the team from the entire second half resurgence the Packers have experienced. Christian Watson is questionable with his hip, and Keyshawn Nixon questionable with his groin injury. Now, LaFleur did say in his press conference today that both still do stand a shot to play, despite not practicing this week. Both are, he didn't say this, but you can just kind of garner that both are going to be game time decisions, and both are quite essential to how the Packers now play. And I'm going to get to that a little bit more later, but know that these 2 guys are questionable. For the Minnesota Vikings, well, they have 2 players out. One is Lynch, their defensive lineman. The other one a little bit more impactful on the game, and that would be Bradbury, their starting center. Again, fairly large key to the game is Bradbury being out. Kenny Clark has had immense success against Bradbury throughout the course of their careers. But the Vikings' backup center is worse than Bradbury. I'm going to detail some stats for you just a little bit in that regard, but both of them are out for the Minnesota Vikings. So, one quick note before I dive into all of the content about this game. Normally, when I'm recording, my 2-year-old is not here, or at least farther away. Due to the circumstances of tonight, he's a lot closer to me while I record. So, if you happen to hear a 2-year-old make a lot of noise, I'm sorry. He's 2. Those of you who are dads of 2-year-olds, you'll understand when I say this. He is not having the best day of his life. So if you hear some noise, yeah, thanks for your forgiveness. All right, here we go. Let's dive into Minnesota Vikings, Green Bay Packers. Well, first and foremost, what is the weather for this Sunday in Green Bay? Frankly, it looks pretty nice. It's going to be in the mid-30s, slightly overcast. It's not going to be the completely frozen tundra. It's going to be the semi-frozen or roughly thawing tundra after the weather of the last couple of weeks. Frankly, I think this is good news for Green Bay. Minnesota, they are in a lot of ways an indoor team. That's the way that they're built now, given their stadium situation in Minnesota. But the Packers, I know Matt LaFleur is undefeated in December. Well, this game isn't in December, but I know he's undefeated in December. I know Aaron Rodgers has a reputation of being the guy to go out in the cold, but the last couple of years, when it's cold, maybe those old bones are just getting a little slower than they used to be for Mr. Rodgers. So mid-30s, I think, is pretty ideal for Green Bay, especially considering that we're now entering January weather. So mid-30s overcast, I think that's good news for Green Bay. As for the Minnesota Vikings, who are they coached by? Well, that would be first-year head coach Kevin O'Connell. They possess a 12-3 record, 8-1 at home, 4-2 on the road. The last 2 games that they've played, both have been thrillers. Both last-second comeback victories. Before that, though, they were beaten by the Lions. So this is a team, the last 3 weeks, that has just been all over the map, right? I mean, we know that 2 weeks ago they had to overcome the biggest halftime deficit ever when they were down by over 30 points to the Indianapolis Colts and then came back to win. Last week they were knotted up against what could be a playoff team in the Giants before having to kick a field goal at the last second. And before that, they lost against the Lions. This is a team. I do believe in momentum. I believe in the mental aspect of football. This Vikings team's got to be getting damn near exhausted because the last 3 weeks, they have been through the ringer. So we'll see if that comes into play. Last time that these two teams met was obviously week 1, the infamous Christian Watson drop game, or the Justin Jefferson just did so well game in week 1. But really, it was a 23-7 Vikings win in Minnesota. The Green Bay defense, I know you may not want to hear this. We don't want to talk about week 1. Okay, but the Green Bay defense did only give up 6 points in the second half of that game because of a lot of adjustments. Beyond that, this is one of those infamous Aaron Jones games. He only had 5 carries in the whole game. I've spent too much oxygen proclaiming my hatred of that situation this year. But 5 carries in that first game averaged basically 10 yards a carry. Beyond that, though, Justin Jefferson was the story of the game for sure. He had 9 catches for 184 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he was supplemented in that week 1 game by Dalvin Cook, who had 20 carries for 90 yards. Dalvin Cook having historically being the guy from Minnesota that Green Bay has difficulty stopping. Still averaged 4.5 yards a carry, while Justin Jefferson was making absolute toast of what was supposed to be one of the elite secondaries in the league. So, what's different now? Well, we know about how the Packers are different, right? This is a healthier Packer team than it was in week 1 because of David Bakhtiari, because of Elton Jenkins. I would not, considering that Aaron Rodgers didn't even throw a touchdown pass in week 1, I would not discount the importance of Bakhtiari, Elton Jenkins, the fact that this line has steadied itself and been consistent now, with the exception of Bakhtiari because of his appendectomy. It's been consistent. It's been the same week in and week out. I think that's a very big deal. And especially going against Z and Hunter, that's a good thing for Green Bay that they finally have a solidified line. Other than that, of course, the development of Christian Watson, if he's able to play. Keyshawn Nixon certainly is a spark plug for the Packers now, if he's able to play. But we know that this is a different Packers team. For the Vikings, honestly, not that much has changed throughout the course of the year. They've been predominantly who they've been throughout the year. An incredibly strong pass rush from Hunter and Z. A secondary that can definitely be exploited against, no doubt about that. But then on the offensive side of the ball, Dalvin Cook chugging along for his 90 yards a game. But the superstar is Justin Jefferson. No doubt about it. What's different now for them? Well, now they have TJ Hawkinson. Yeah, they acquired the Detroit tight end at the trade deadline, and He had been quiet through the majority of his games, but last week had probably his finest game as a Minnesota Viking. Something new that the Packers will have to account for. So this Viking team, all year long, where do they rank? What are their stats? What are the hard numbers on a per-game basis? Well, offensively, they put up 25.2 points per game. That's good for 7th in the NFL. Running the ball, they run the ball for 94.5 yards per game. That's 28th in the NFL. Who would have thought that a Dalvin Cook-led rushing attack would be 28th in the NFL? Passing, this is where they've really gone off. 259 yards passing per game, good for 6th in the NFL. According to PFF, who are their highest graded players? Of course, that's Justin Jefferson, coming in with a 90.9 grade. But the other one is Christian Darrisaw, one of their starting tackles, at 90.3. Yes, that is one thing about this Viking team as opposed to other years. This Viking team can protect Kirk Cousins a lot better. It still has its weaknesses, which I'm going to get to, but overall, this is a stronger offensive line than Minnesota has put on the field for years. And Darrisaw is a very big reason as to why. But overall, this offense, we know it, is Justin Jefferson and friends. Be it Adam Thielen having a big week, Osborne having a big week, Dalvin Cook running the ball a ton, Hawkinson having a big week. The one standard that you know you're going to have is Justin Jefferson going off. Then it's just a matter of who else is going to join him. And that's the Minnesota Viking offense this year. Defensively, a very, very uncharacteristic Minnesota defense this year. They're giving up 24.9 points per game. That's 28th in the NFL. Rushing, they're giving 120.8 yards per game. That's middle of the pack in the NFL, something the Packers will look to exploit. But where they really can be operated against is in their passing defense, where they're giving up 281.5 yards per game. That is dead last in the NFL. Well, who are their highest graded? Of course, it's Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith. Hunter having a grade of about 87 and Smith having a grade of about 84. As Zadarius has certainly returned to his, let's call it Green Bay Prime form. Not what we saw last year, but his Green Bay Prime form in a Minnesota Viking uniform. So, there are 4 key matchups to this game in my mind. The 4 things that I'm going to be watching for most. Number 1. Are they actually going to cover Justin Jefferson this time? I thought it was super interesting based upon the locker room conversations this week. Jay Alexander, Rasul Douglas, this week they are not, they have not, they will not go back and re-watch the week 1 game. You know, that's pretty unorthodox in the NFL, right? When you get made burnt toast, generally, you go back and you watch the film again, but they have not. That was a collective decision by the cornerback group that they were not going to go back and watch. And part of the reason why is because we're different now. And that Jair even said it, that week 1 performance by Justin Jefferson was a fluke. And he acknowledged that Jefferson is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. I don't want this to sound like it was a bunch of trash talk, because he did acknowledge how good Jefferson is, while acknowledging how good he is as a corner, and said that week 1 performance was a fluke. The question, though, is schematically, are they actually going to line up Jair on Jefferson more often? Maybe, although I tend to doubt it. Are they going to look vastly different? Maybe. After that week 1 loss of Packers versus Vikings, there was a lot of talk about how Joe Barry doesn't know how to call a defense, etc., etc. But then a lot of defensive-minded people that I trust a whole awful lot went back, watched the game again, and said, hey, the scheme itself wasn't terrible. What was terrible was the guys not communicating and just not doing anything right. So which version are we going to see this time around? We don't know, right? That's the whole thing. So, moving on, number 2. Green Bay's pass rush against the interior of the Minnesota line. Now, we know that they've got Darrisaw, they have good tackles, but with Bradbury out especially, the interior of the Viking offensive line can be disrupted. This may be the perfect time for Devontae Wyatt to continue to grow and ascend, as we've seen in the last few weeks with Dean Lowry out. This may be the perfect time for Kenny Clark to have his December and January resurgence that we seem to see every year. So Here's the matter. Bradbury, the starting center for the Vikings, he's out. Their backup is Austin Schlottman, who in the snaps that he's played this year ranks 49th of 54 eligible centers according to PFF grading across the NFL. 49th of 54. In addition, Ed Ingram, one of their starting guards, he leads the league in both sacks and pressures. Sacks and pressures. Not just one, both. He leads the league in both allowed for the guard position. Shout out to Sam Holman for putting that information on Twitter. So, is the scheme going to dictate that Clark and Wyatt are able to exploit and attack against the interior of the Viking offensive line, which quite clearly is quite possibly the defect in the armor of the Vikings to get after Kirk Cousins quickly? I will say, too, Kirk Cousins, and maybe this comes into play. Maybe we see some Quay Walker on the edge. Maybe we see some different things because Kirk's completion percentage generally goes down about 14% when he's blitzed. His touchdown to interception ratio is better when he's not blitzed, but overall, when he is blitzed, his numbers go down, including completion percentage by about 14%, which is no joke. So will we see some different things to make Green Bay get pressure on Kirk Cousins? Number 3, will the Green Bay spark plugs be active? Yeah, Christian Watson, Keyshawn Nixon, they're both game time decisions, but yet these guys have been so impactful for the Packers in this second half resurgence. This is not a game, despite the struggles of the Minnesota defense, this is not a game that I know I've called for it before, but this isn't one where I want to see them all knotted up and playing this condensed offense. Going against this very, very struggling Minnesota secondary, you want to have all of your electricity out there on the field. Aaron Jones not getting an injury designation is a big deal, especially considering he averaged almost 10 yards a carry in week 1. But this isn't a game where I think you're going to wind up running the ball 70% of the time. And Christian Watson's speed, we've seen how influential it is. Now they do have a new wide receiver on the 53 in the form of Bo Melton. Are they going to use him and his 4.3 speed? How involved can he be? Well, he certainly isn't going to be as impactful as Watson. We know that. So, will they be active? Keyshawn Nixon, an important part of Keyshawn Nixon. Yes, obviously, he's a great kick returner. Very well could be the all-pro at kick returner this year. But the other part is, with Darnell Savage playing more safety and a slight demotion for Rudy Ford, that means Savage can't play as much nickel. And if Nixon is unable to go, their depth at nickel gets perilously thin, which is something you really want going against Minnesota's receivers and their versatility. And then number 4, protect QB1. I've already said it, Bakhtiari's back, Elton Jenkins is back. This is not the same offensive line that we saw in week 1. Hunter and Smith are so good for Minnesota, and they are so fast off the line. You see it. They are fast. They are aggressive. One of the top edge rushing duos in the NFL, without a doubt. And having Bakhtiari back, having Yash healthy this week, having Elton Jenkins back, will be a very important factor in this game. However, if they are able to get off the edge, if they are able to get to Aaron Rodgers and disrupt this passing attack for the Packers, it's going to be bad news for the Packers. Minnesota can still be run on. Like, let's not forget that. This is a team that can be run on. It's not like it was when you were going against, like we've seen earlier this year, some of the elite run defenses and then terrible pass defenses. Minnesota's defense on the whole isn't doing great. So they can be run on, but if you allow Hunter and Smith to take away the pass game, it's going to spell trouble for Green Bay. So here's my overall prediction. We already know that Green Bay is going to be scoreboard watching, right? They may not know the final score of Washington and Cleveland when they get out on the field. But they're going to be scoreboard watching in the locker room. We know it. We know how important this game is for Green Bay. We know how important Washington's game is for Green Bay, especially considering in Week 18, the Eagles and the Cowboys, if things remain status quo. Now, I know Jalen Hurts is out, but still, if the Saints can upset the Eagles, then Week 18 is going to matter. Cowboys already disposing of the Titans on Thursday night. When we get into Week 18, if the Saints beat the Eagles, that means that the Eagles and Cowboys are going to have to duke it out Week 18, basically for home field advantage. Minnesota also could be wrapped up in there a little bit. But that means that all of these top-tier teams in the NFC are going to have to try, which means they're going to get a second chance at a loss for Washington. But if the Eagles beat the Saints, they're going to clinch home field and they don't really have a lot to play for in Week 18. Which means Washington has a much easier road to victory in Week 18. Which means Washington needs to lose this game against Cleveland. If Washington is able to beat Cleveland on Sunday, I think Green Bay may get in their own head about it. Going against a team, and let's make no bones about it, Minnesota has been unperilously lucky this year. Yes, they are 12-3. And I do believe in football you are what your record says you are, but this is by no means an invincible 12-3 team. I'd hesitate to even call them a powerhouse. This is a razor-thin margin of error team that just has gotten lucky a lot this year. But they are 12-3. They are good, no doubt about it. Green Bay still favored at home against a 12-3 team, which tells you what Vegas thinks of them, but still, nonetheless. So, at the end of the day, if Washington is able to beat Cleveland, I'm concerned that Green Bay could get in their own head about it. If Washington loses to Cleveland, then I think Green Bay comes out with their piss hot, as Matt LaFleur says. I think this is a Green Bay victory. I do. You can call me a homer, you can call me stupid, you can call me an optimist. That's fine. I've been called worse. But at the end of the day, Green Bay takes this game in Lambeau 33-30. That's it. And the playoff dreams stay alive until meeting the Lions in Lambeau for Week 18. That's right. Chance is still there if Green Bay pulls out the win, which I think they're going to 33-30. So, hope you all have an absolutely wonderful weekend. Hope you had a great day today. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the little button. It's just a little, just click it. Just a little button. That's all there is to it. Just hit that. Join the Lombardi Time Brews community. Thanks so much for checking out today's video. And as always, go Pack Go.